Welcome to the podcast Crash, Burn, Rise Again, where we share stories of burning out and rebuilding better. Join myself, Shireen Lister, your host, and my special guests as we share our personal journeys through burnout, stress, overwhelm, and more, and show how we came out the other side. Learn and leverage from the lessons and wisdom we gained along the way so we can help you to rise too. Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the podcast. Welcome back if you were watching last episode. So to say, I hope you were. If this is your first one, welcome. New listeners are always welcome here. So I just wanted to lean in and say thank you so much for those of you who did listen, subscribe, review, show up, watch all the things. And support me through the start of the podcast. It's been a new experience, and with new things comes stretching. So there comes excitement and also a little bit of trepidation, which is also sometimes known as fear. It doesn't always mean when we feel that bit of fear that it's bad for us. It just means it's different. And I've been really trying to just manage that and go with the flow with it as much as I can, which as you learn more and more about me and my journey over this episode and future ones, you'll know that going with the flow has not always been something that comes easily for me. It's not always been a strength of mine, but it's something I'm definitely working on and leaning into. And I love when there's opportunities or things come up like this, when I naturally go with the flow. I don't have to force it. It's just kind of the way that I do some things now more and more, which is kind of cool. I'm loosening my grip on control, which wasn't really something that I needed to be doing to the extent that I was, and which was probably a contributing factor to my burning out and my stress over the years. When we're in a constant state of stress and a constant state of, I need to be on top of everything, I need to be controlling it all, I need to be doing everything all the time. Yeah, we can see how we can burn out potentially. Yeah. And so speaking of which, I want to get back into a little bit of my story that I started last week. I kind of did the setup of how things were tracking in my life, how I went about doing my schooling, how I went about doing life, how I went about doing my work as a teacher in the early stages of my career, probably the first half or more of my career, if I'm really honest. I taught for about 13 years, and I think this is kind of up until about 8 years into it. That I was really operating in this way. And I have to be really honest, sometimes I still get pretty close to burnout again. It's a constant work in progress, but it's something that I can see really quickly and start to take actions to remedy now, because I've been there, seen that, got out of it. But also I've done all the work on changing myself from the inside out so that I'm more equipped to deal with it when it happens, which is what's super important. And that's what the core of what my work is as a coach and a trainer, is about helping people understand what's going on in our mind, understand the drives for these things so that we can change and have different ways. Cool. So I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into, so I set up kind of those patterns, those belief systems I had of, I need to do things right, I need to do things thoroughly, I need to be accepted by everyone, and you do that by doing everything for them and being of service and all of that, which is lovely. I always, when I talk about boundaries and things like that, I always say we can help people. It's just about what is it doing for us and to what extent are we doing it and when. So this was the way that I was operating. So at work, it meant that I was putting in like 110% of the time to try and be everywhere and do everything for everyone. It was a way to try and keep my job. It was a way to try and seem important to people and design a way that if people thought that I was important and invaluable in what I did, therefore I would be important and invaluable to them as a person. But sadly, that's not always the case. Well, firstly, people who liked me regardless of what I did. So there's people that I worked with back in those days. So we're talking, sort of 2010s era, about 10, 12 years ago, who I'm still friends with now. So I still see one of the people I used to work with every week then. Neither of us do that job anymore. And we definitely don't do the things for each other that I was trying to do for people back then. So she obviously likes me and accepts me regardless of that. So firstly, doing that doesn't necessarily get that. And I even learnt down the track when I did burn out, when I did get injured, and when I did get sick, that it didn't keep me my job either. You know, I ended up being transferred out of my role and not supported by my superiors at the time while I was on sick leave from an injury at work. You know, so I really wasn't supported. You know, they didn't give me any support through that process, even at that time. So you start to learn that as you go, that, you know, sometimes our actions don't actually even get us the results that we want, but we're pushing so hard and treating ourselves so poorly to try and get so much external gratification and attention and support. And so I have to preface at this point, as I talk through the next little bit, that I am not a medical professional, and I have never been. And I also have not been clinically diagnosed as having been burnt out. But I can tell you what, I know for sure that I have been. And some of it is that conventional medicine doesn't always join all the dots of things. So I never fought very hard to get a diagnosis because I was struggling so much with getting some clarity and some support on some other diagnoses that I had. So, for example, my medical professionals at one stage didn't even share with me my full diagnosis because to them it didn't really matter because they would treat me the same in terms of the treatments and remedies they would give me. But of course it mattered to me. And of course I looked at more holistic approaches other than medicine to reforming myself on the back end of burnout and some of the physical things that happened. So stuff like stress management, diet, supplements, all sorts of things. Of course, with guidance from people who are skilled and professional. But I just want to put that out there that I'm speaking from my personal experience here and what it felt like for me. I'm not a doctor. And I, of course, support the brilliant work that our medical professionals do. But I feel it is still a field that only has a limited knowledge, a limited scope, and a limited capacity, therefore, for the individuals within it. So I'm going to preface it in that way. But what my burnout started to look like was it was a culmination of being anxious for many, many years. So I was suffering with a lot of anxiety. I'd wake up each morning and I'd feel a bit anxious about the day that was ahead, but I'd get up and I'd soldier and I'd do it anyway. Because I'm an achiever, I'm a finisher sort of person. And I just thought that's what you do. You just get up and you go to work no matter what. You just get up and you push on through because it's got to get done and people rely on you. So that was probably some of it, was I needed to learn to maybe take a freaking sick day every so often. And trust me, I did in the later years of my work. And I actually learned that if when I was getting a little under the pump and a little tired, that if I actually took a strategic sick day then, so one when it was easiest and had less impact with me not being at work, then I was better off for longer term. Rather than if I let myself just crash and then I might need 3 or 4 days off at a really inconvenient time. You know, and because sometimes it was, and I really didn't learn that lesson for a very long time. So I used to push through illness, sickness, feeling crap, you know, just because it was like, oh, I need to martyr myself and, you know, no one else could possibly do this. But can you see how that can contribute even more to our burnout? Now, I'm not saying that everyone should just take, you know, a sick day off once a week and this and that, but it's taking days that are strategic to allow ourselves to rejuvenate, taking days because our mental health is not great, also good. I mean, I was suffering for years with daily anxiety, and then later on I developed autoimmune disease, and yet I still didn't think that I was worthy of taking a sick day because I was able to get up and get to school. In fact, I recall one school day when I knew I probably shouldn't have been there, but it was the final week of classes for my year 12, my senior graduating students, and we had their final assessments, and it was a practical performance assessment where their teacher needed to watch it. So it's not like they were just sitting down and writing an exam that anyone could supervise. And so I actually dragged myself in when I was on really strong antibiotic medications and things like that, and I wasn't able to eat because I couldn't keep anything down. I had severe stomach cramps, and I dragged myself to school for half days for that week to be there for their classes. Like, seriously, I still wasn't realizing. So burnout to me came as my body started to really not cope and started to shut down, started to really fatigue, and I still wasn't listening. So this anxiety coupled with stress and probably not sleeping great, and particularly even though I wasn't always working extraordinarily long hours, and I wasn't a teacher who worked all weekend, not at all. And I definitely didn't work holidays. I'd push hard to have holidays off. I didn't have anything outside of work. So even though I wasn't physically doing work lots of the time beyond work hours, I had nothing else to balance it. And I think that was a key thing that burnt out. My mind was just only filled with work or anxiety on the whole. I mean, of course I did some things, but generally it was that. And then I found myself on this decline. So I was running out of energy. I was fatigued all the time. I was told my iron was low. I was just like, I've just got all these bits and pieces and I don't quite really know what's going on. But I kind of pushed through. And I figured over time as it went on that I actually went into adrenal fatigue. So I did have this diagnosed medically. So I went into adrenal fatigue where I ran out of, is how I put it, enough cortisol. So we have a boost of cortisol at the start of our day and it slowly declines across a predictable pattern throughout our days. And mine was barely making quantities to follow that pattern, let alone the regular amounts. And it's just because I think I'd been anxious and stressed and overworked for so long. And because one of my strategies through anxiety was to just keep going on. Because it was if I stopped, then I'd think more and I'd feel the anxiety more, and that would be bad because I'd be letting it back in. Because whenever I'd let it come in really strong, it took over and I couldn't control it in the past. So that was my way to kind of deal with that. But it created this burnout. So I ran out of stress response hormone, which is what cortisol is, which was not so great. I'd also had a long history of a really unhappy gut, would be how I would describe it. And so it started to reach a precipice of when I had all these bits of symptoms and I went and saw someone who finally tied it all together. So I'd also known that I had some problems with my thyroid. So I'd had the GP diagnose that I had some lumps on my thyroid and I was on some medication for that because I was feeling some physical side effects of that in my throat. So we got that diagnosed. And then I went, but I'm still tired and I still have this low iron and I still this and I'm just getting dizzy and all these things. And I was eventually diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is when your body starts to attack your thyroid thinking it's a foreign entity, which therefore causes it to not be able to function properly. And it's underactive, so it's underperforming. And so I was like, oh crap, well that's happened. And that's a combination in my mind of my gut health being poor and my stress levels from my anxiety being so high that I depleted all my adrenal resources to handle things. So literally I had burnt out my system and it was attacking itself. And so of course I did some things to start to manage my thyroid condition beyond just those medications and things like that. But I didn't slow down work. I didn't put enough focus elsewhere still. And so whilst I was addressing the symptoms and I was kind of addressing some of what was going on behind the disease, I wasn't really looking at the root cause of why did this happen? What led to it? I didn't try and resolve my anxiety anymore. I didn't try and reduce my stress anymore. So things kept going downhill. And I got to a point where I was so dizzy one day that I fainted at work. And as I fainted, I hit my head, I think on a metal pole. I don't know, no one saw. I wasn't quite with it at that point because I'd fainted. And I hit my head in such a way that I sustained a traumatic brain injury. So I had 2 small bleeds on my brain. Yeah. And I then went through a time of recovering from that. So my biggest symptom after the first sort of couple of months of recovery, and I was back to work in about 10 weeks' time, my biggest lingering symptom was headaches. So I had constant headaches, which then downgraded to daily, to regular, to every couple of days over about the next 2 years. I've mentioned before, I'm a really slow learner when it comes to burnout, because guess what? I still didn't quite get it. So I figured that work was a bit crappy. And this was also around the time that work wasn't supporting me when I was being transferred and I wanted to stay and things like that. I got nothing. So I started to set some boundaries around this time at work and go, look, if I don't want to do something, I'm going to say no sometimes. Or more so, if I've already done that thing 3 times and now you're changing your mind, I'm going to say, no, I'm not changing it again. So I started to get a little bit firmer because I was so depleted. And it was funny, I was having a conversation recently with someone where they said, oh, so were you part-time after your injury? And I said, yeah, I told you over the next 9 or 10 weeks, I was on a return to work plan. So I increased my hours from a little bit back to full-time. So it was part-time then. And they said, no, but you had symptoms for 2 years. Were you part-time all of that time? And I actually realized that in that time I changed jobs. I think I moved house like twice probably as well. Why not? And I, at one point, was working 6 days a week across 2 jobs. I'm really slow to learn my lessons. I didn't see how this was potentially going to create the same problems again for a while. And it was only when I became so unhappy in the way that my life was moving forward, in the growth that was happening in my life or not, and how I was feeling so out of touch with myself, that I created some different patterns that then allowed me to finally break up with this pattern of burning out. And luckily, nothing really bad happened again then. But, that didn't help my thyroid condition. It didn't help my stress levels. It didn't help any of that going through that injury and that recovery from it. And then I had in the subsequent years from that, I had a big breakup. I had a whole rebuild of my life and so on. But it was around that time that I did start to make some serious changes. So first I want to say the little stuff that I started that helped, because it's incremental is what works. So as I said, I started to set some boundaries and some limits on my time, on my availability. And I turned my focus on me. So I started to focus on filling my cup, as cliche as that saying is, it really is true. I focused on my health and I focused on just doing things for me. I had to relearn what I enjoyed to do, and I had to rediscover things outside of my work that filled me up and made me happy. And one of the things that it led me on was a personal development journey, which led me into a coaching journey, which led me to leaving teaching and then where I am today. And I didn't leave teaching purely because of burnout prevention. I have to say that I was ready for a change in a whole lot of other ways. It wasn't filling me up and lighting my passions up in the same way as it used to. Plus, having some more flexibility in working for myself allows me to avoid burnout as well in my case. But what really changed in setting those boundaries, in finding those interests, in focusing on my beliefs and my state and my being, is that when I did the inner work and that personal development, so when I turned inward and I looked at where did all of these belief systems start, these ones that I was practicing through school that led to this burnout, where did all of these limits start? Where did these problem patterns I was creating start that I wasn't listening to? Because when we look at where they originate, we can then create best and lasting change. And for me, that was when I turned inward. I was able to listen to all those things that that little child in me wanted at the beginning and start to help her realize how I have all of that right here, right now, within me, within my daily life. So I don't need to be chasing it anymore. I started to create confidence within myself because I knew myself better. I was confident in what I want. And so I'm able to assert it myself better. I'm able to set a boundary. I'm able to say what I do and don't want. And it also gave me more resources to go about doing things in a different way. And when we do things differently, we can get different outcomes. So instead of everything always burning me out or stressing me out, I was able to maybe have more joy with the chore at home. I was able to look at different work solutions and ways to bring in money and things like that, which has kind of brought me near to where I am now. And as I've said, there is always a constant ebb and flow with finding my way through avoiding burning out, because it's easy sometimes to dive head on into work. I set really firm boundaries with myself about making sure I have time off. It's something, particularly as a business owner, that's important. I do not work after dinner time unless it's a set, team meeting thing for a training. And I do not work on weekends unless it's a training weekend again that, usually is hosted by someone else, because I don't think I would set my own on a weekend unless I had to. So I put some limits on things, even the things that I enjoy, but are ones that maybe will overwork me and stress me out and get me highly strung. And I'm still finding that balance of not trying to be everything to everyone. So it's an ongoing thing, but wow, it feels so much better now. It feels so much easier now. I feel so much more confident within myself to do what is right for me. And it's because I dove deep inside. So I started to take a step back from things and focus on me was step one, but then diving deep into what I really needed and wanted was really the way to truly get those changes for me and get over that burnout in a mental sense, whilst I was also working on it physically in terms of things like my health, my lifestyle, my diet and stuff like that, and rest, literally resting, laying down on the couch or in bed sometimes. And yeah, I'm excited to see where things go as I continue forward. Anyway, that's kind of a recap in the short form with the highlights of my journey through burnout and particularly through coming out the other side of it. I'm super excited next episode to have a special guest who's going to share a little bit about their journey and their experience of what burnout was like for them and how they too came out the other side. So tune in for our next one as well. I hope to see you there. Well, that brings to an end today's episode of Crash, Burn, Rise Again. It's been fantastic to have you with us today, and I hope you can join me next time. I also hope you've really enjoyed and maybe even learned something today. What I ask next is, if you're loving what you're hearing, please subscribe on whatever channel you normally listen to your podcasts or on my YouTube channel. And you can also follow along and find all previous podcast episodes on my website, recastcoaching.com.au. If you're enjoying the podcast, the other thing I'd love is if you can share and recommend to any friends, family and colleagues who you think would benefit from a little bit of crash, burn, rise again. Thanks so much, and until next time, bye for now.